It's now been 7 years. How far has human civilization advanced and progressed in such a short time?
You are exactly like Kamina was in the old days. Have you learned nothing from his death? You haven't grown at all.
So, doing nothing is what you need to do, huh? Now you're finally the same as the Spiral King!
Act 3 of Gurren Lagann is a different beast from the prior two. It opens not on giant robots slugging each other to and fro in bombastic action, but on paperwork and delegation. Kamina is memorialized in grand fashion, the city they establish is bustling and moving along at record pace, and everyone is experiencing a new combination for the first time: peace and freedom at once. But under the surface there are dissatisfied rumblings, as Lord Genome's final words spur Rossio on to defy orders from the now Supreme Commander Simon. Team Gurren are all now heads of government offices, but they bicker and squabble with their leadership, stumbling barely through their duties. And as the population hits 1 million, their peace is shattered, their freedom threatened, and their anger at an all-time high with the arrival of the Anti-Spiral. Just as it seemed they'd reached the calm stasis of these sort of lives we all live, chaos returned once again. But was that kind of stasis they found exactly why everything went so wrong? First, we discussed how Kamina led them to the surface, and by covering his own weakness, spurred them to action. Then we looked at this fall, the reaction, and what they could all learn from it. And now we see that the lesson was nowhere near complete. It's time for us not to analyze a form of leadership, not its pros and cons, but instead to look at a broader horizon. What even is leadership supposed to be? I think that's the question Gurren Lagann asks of its main cast in the final arc, delaying the most critical aspect for last, in a way almost sadly fitting for the real world. Too often we learn that from the very start we were looking at the question all wrong, or sometimes not even realizing that there was a question to be asked. I think the best place to start this discussion is with the Anti-Spiral, the enemy who seemingly tries to destroy, but may have actually accidentally saved our heroes. Either way, they perform that action by being the exact opposite of what leadership is. Their goal is the opposite of the hope Kamina stood for, as they seek to inflict ultimate despair upon the Spiral races. Their reasoning is that ultimate despair is the only way to break the endless spirit of Spiral races, a spirit which may lead to the destruction of the universe. Evolution leads these species to branch out in wild and erratic paths to fight anything that stands in their way as they seek to grow and advance. It happens at a rapid pace. In only 7 years, humanity was able to set up mass production of the Gra pearls, raise an entire city from the ground up, and develop most of the systems and technology familiar to us. It's just about unthinkably quick, giving credence to the fears of the Anti-Spiral. With this unhinged advancement branching out in any and every direction, they see it possible that unchecked spiral power could destroy the physical laws of the world and lead to the end of everything. So they simply stopped progressing at all. Their homeworld is a series of once-spiral life forms locked in a repeating pattern, all having given themselves over to eternal stasis, seeking to wipe out any and all who threaten the continuance of that stasis through spiral power. They're entirely hung up on what Kamina will later call a what-if, a future that doesn't exist but seemingly might, eventually. This fear of the what-if is the driving force of the Anti-Spiral's entire being. Rather than risk the small potential of losing everything through unchecked evolution, they took the only guaranteed safe option to never advance or change again. To prevent one future they feared, they wiped out every possible future that could be. We can see their focus on potential futures by one of the final efforts they have to stall Team Gurren. They locked all the conscious beings with spiral power into an endless loop of potentials. They lived out fantasies which never happened on Earth. It's the other end of things, showing everything that could be good, but it's the same idea. An endless distraction from one reality. This is the raw power of what if, making them so caught up in what could be, they simply forgot the agency of their lives, the same as the Anti-Spiral. That quashing of the evolutionary force, the desire to branch out in erratic paths and create an unknown future, is the opposite of what leadership should be. But I still say the Anti-Spiral may have saved them because those invaders weren't the only ones who exhibited this behavior. A focus on what if is the same way Rossio leads, and the same reason why the people riot. Rossio governs based on the worst what if. From his days in Adi village and his time ruling over the world, the idea is the same. Sacrifice whatever it takes for the guaranteed option. Sacrifice for survival. His village elder maintained the brutal lottery to ensure there would be enough food to maintain, but never to grow. As a leader, Rossio decides that instead of fighting, they take the guaranteed option, which ends up being a sacrifice of 82% of the population, before being revealed to have been a pointless endeavor altogether. It isn't an easy decision, as he rightfully explains to Kittan.
If we fail, humanity truly will go extinct. Tell me, are you able to bear that responsibility?
When you look at the worst case of each side, it can make sense. Flee and humanity will always have the chance to rebuild. Fight, and it may be entirely wiped out. But where he's like the Anti-Spiral is looking only at the worst of each option. You can also look at it another way. Look at what's being lost, not what's being possibly saved. Flee and you're sacrificing a majority of the population. Fight and you can save all of it. This is the same thing Kamina feuded with the village elder over. I'll literally play the audio from how I described it in our first video on this topic. This mindset of all or nothing is the cornerstone of the wonderful episode 5 as well. He hates that the chief is willing to take 10% or so rather than fighting for 100%. In Kamina's mind, it's more worthwhile to risk that small percent for a huge increase rather than just try and sustain what's almost nothing. To be fair, Rossio isn't a bad leader, but simply one who was bad for this situation. In times of peace, the hard decisions aren't made in numbers of lives, but in the mitigation of daily costs. It's establishing services in the right locations to best meet need, making supply lines to adequately feed population centers, and all of that is managing limited resources. These are all things that require the kind of touch he has that, say, Kamina would have never had. And like everyone else, he learned from Kamina. Part of what gives him the potential to be a good leader comes from this. He explains,
human impulses catch fire and spread in the blink of an eye. Someone must be made to take responsibility.
This act, recognizing this and placing the blame on a common enemy, is exactly what Kamina did, first feeding those emotions through himself to create a legend. Simon improved on this by cutting himself out of the equation a bit more, allowing everyone to recognize their own roles in fighting the enemy, or at least those who were close to him. Rossio learned what kind of society emerged from those two before him and played to it. But once again, he does so out of fear. He sees their emotions as something dangerous, not to be destroyed like the Anti-Spiral, but rather something which must be controlled. And that brings us to recognize that in another way, he didn't learn from Kamina because he makes some of the same mistakes. He keeps the reality of his situation in the shadows, both the personal cost and his weakness, as well as the very direction he's taking humanity in. If it was up to him, they never would have learned about the destruction of Earth as they did. When everyone was panicking, I was yelling internally, just tell them that you have a plan. But that wouldn't be the most effective way to manipulate their emotions into support. And continuing on with Kamina's mistakes, once he finally reveals the plan to save them all, he does so by himself, taking the credit and becoming the next idol of hope, same as Kamina would have. He's playing a game of numbers with the incalculability of human emotions, trying to adapt his strategy to the society that Simon and Kamina left behind, and it doesn't work. And we can address why they riot, as well as the faults in Simon's leadership, from which we can find the meaning of leadership. As we said, the riots are another case of the what-ifs, only this time as they look to the best-case scenario. They're angry at losing the lives they would have never even dreamed about only a few years prior, described in this exchange between Rossio and Simon.
It's all self-centered nonsense. They've completely forgotten what life was like in the pits.
I think that's great.
Is it, though?
But this is a direct result of the way Simon led them. When he took over for Kamina and when he began to lead the new world, Simon didn't understand what leadership meant. He simply understood what Kamina did and then how to improve on it. All they had was a winning formula for the times they were in, not for leadership in general. What the pair did was collect the bottled up energy of the human race and unleash it on a common point, in their case, Lord Genome. They burst out from beneath the surface with this pent-up desire for freedom and saw it through. But all they ever knew how to do was direct energy at a foe, and so that's all their followers knew how to do as well. It was a form of leadership, not the concept as a whole. With this, they were never ready to become true leaders, but they did anyway because they always did the hard work for everyone else. They just kept doing what they always did. Once Tepelin had fallen, that energy that facilitated their victory didn't fade away. Humanity will always have that drive into the unknown. It's just instead of being directed to something meaningful, it was allowed to fester and stew, to become selfish and negative because it was going anywhere and nowhere all at once. Don't get me wrong, I hate these citizens. I almost didn't want to cover this arc because their reaction eats at me from the inside because it's so stupid. But I understand why it's so stupid. It was a failure of leadership. People weren't working to a better future. They were left to their own devices in a world with new, unbounded pleasures they were experiencing for the first time. It drove them to bland hedonism. The only way they'd ever come together was in a collective hatred. Rossio understood that and made the decision to act on where it was directed, ordering the death of one of his closest allies. A sacrifice for survival emerging directly from Simon and Kamina's world. All of this is the collection of their leadership and its failures. And these failures are what led Rossio to become loathsome like the citizens as well. He's arrogant and cocky as he takes over, partially because he knows the importance of a strong face from Kamina, but also because he witnessed how awful everyone was at their jobs. He can only think himself to be the perfect leader because he's witnessing awful leadership. From his perspective, he may as well be infinitely better than them. Not quite a failure of Simon, but more so a lesson of why good leadership is so important, because only through it can the next leaders have any hope of improving in the right ways.
Me and the fellas just don't fit in with all this government stuff, Rossio. We're just Team Gurren.
You sure you haven't mistaken me for someone else? I'm just Miss Yomiko, an ordinary new school teacher.
It's in your hands now, Rossio.
But Simon!
I'm just Simon the Digger.
I've been saying the word direction a lot, and that's because it's at the core of our idea of what leadership is, a concept we can now tackle. The human spirit is erratic and illogical. It spurs out from its starting point in incalculable directions, branching off in paths we could have never imagined it would take. It's forceful and subtle all at once, a mixture of soft feelings motivating grand actions. It's always there, always acting and driving us forward into a future we know absolutely nothing about. Left to its own devices, it is dangerous in that way. It leads to endless sources of inspiration, but also infinite despair. The anti-spirals were once spiral life forms like anything else. Their emotional drive led them to what they are now. This illogical and boundless nature is a guarantee of the universe, so the role of a leader is to direct those feelings to something meaningful and beneficial. It's to remind people of the importance of that direction, to prevent them from getting lost in the what-ifs, and keep them on a path which leads to a good future. With that in mind, Kamina was a good leader for his time. He directed that energy to a beneficial future through himself. Simon was as well by improving on that formula by not putting it through himself, but then it falls apart when there's no enemy. They'd reach the surface, now able to gaze up at every star with complete wonder and a complete lack of direction. It sounds odd, but the next step is to narrow that vision, not to the same point for everyone, not out of control or fear, but out of love, to clear a pathway to positive futures and block off the pathways to negative ones. If they want to make mistakes, they must be allowed to, but a leader should try their best to steer them gently from such things. It's a mitigation, like what Rossio chose, but with the respect for humanity he lacked. Lives can't be looked at as a game of numbers. Sometimes hard decisions have to be made, but there reaches a point where those decisions discard the very fabric of humanity, like being locked in a spaceship for years, the same as a pit underground, knowing you only exist because so many others died. So it's absolutely perfect that when Rossio learns this lesson, he finally says that he wants to feel the weight of a single human life. There needs to be a lot of emphasis on how Kamina explains this to Simon in his return. He says,
"Just don't be distracted by the what-ifs, should-haves, and if-onlys. The one thing you choose yourself, that is the truth of your universe."
And that choice is very important. That's all Kamina was ever really doing. He was trying to grasp the future he wanted. It just so happened it was good for everyone else too, and that he fought at the right time and with the right people and against the right people to turn it into a movement. But it was simply his desire. When humanity reached the surface, it was good for them, but it wasn't a future they chose, simply the one chosen for them. Because of that, Everything was really done for them. Someone else had always fought the battles, and they didn't expect that to change. Another reason why they act so selfishly. There's a big difference between being fought for and being led, and that reaction they have is exactly it. I think this idea of choice is really shown best through Kittan, though. When he makes the decision to sacrifice himself, it's for the future he thinks should exist, one where his family can live in peace on the surface. It may help everyone, but at the end of the day, it's simply his desire that he's taking into his own hands. As he explained to Gimme and Dari, and as Yoko later repeats to him,
You're doing this because you want to. I can't stop you.
while these circumstances required a cost that no one should ever have to pay for the future they want, it was based on exactly the kind of inspiration a leader should provide. I say his decision was a selfishly motivated one that simply happened to benefit humanity because that's exactly what a leader should narrow the possibilities down to. The most we can ask of anyone is to act selfishly in a positive way. True leaders give everyone the chance to chase their own desires in a way that doesn't negatively impact the world and ideally benefits it. It's a suggestion, a nudge in the right direction that helps illuminate the path to a future which is more than certainly not a positive one, guided but not forced. It's what he chose to chase with a burning passion. Kamina returning to inspire them here is much more appropriate than him simply being their lost comrade as well. His return here is the final note on the idea of legends. We looked at how positive firstly they could be, and later how negatively as well, and this is one last reminder that they have their time and place like anything else. Kamina was hope, an idol of freedom in their darkest moments. He was a miracle when it was needed, a well of nonsensical statements and actions that could be meaningful to anyone and everyone because there were so many, and because they only meant what people themselves personally gave to them. Faced with ultimate despair, this is the kind of leadership they need, the kind which is bullheaded and brute and directed against a genuine evil. Kamina can return successfully here because it was his time and place to. It's the same as why Rossio stays on Earth for this fight, because his time isn't war, Simon's is. And that's the final part of the lesson which leads us through the resolution. Once the fight is over and humanity is saved, once Nia disappears, and the future is once again open to the entire sky of stars, Simon leaves because his time has ended. He's not the leader this new peaceful world needs. He learned everything we covered here, and he fought for a world where he would be obsolete. He explains it, as well as the loss of their comrades who walked the same path as him, like this.
Those who are dead are dead. If we bring them back to life, they'll just get in the way of the next generation, right? There's someone better suited to go down the tunnels I dug.
And this same sentiment is displayed when Rossio learns the faults of his leadership, discussing how things change over time.
You eventually learn that something you thought was a precious treasure is nothing but junk. I wonder if that qualifies as evolution.
Progress means leaving things no longer needed behind. You can't move forward if the path in front of you is completely crowded. Further, this is also a correction of Kamina's mistakes. It is genuinely sad to see the greatest hero their world will ever see fade off into obscurity as Simon does. But it's what he needed to do. If he stuck around and became a symbol like Kamina did, a constant reminder worshipped in stone before all, it would have only taken them down the same flawed path they once tried. Simon rejects the brand that he and Kamina became, and instead allows the world to focus on a legend which is more positive. Not the pilots of Gurren Lagann, but Gurren Lagann itself. Something that many people have piloted. At the end of the day, anyone could be in. Something people can aspire to be for many reasons. I generally love this line as one to finish off the series, the kid who says, "Look at all those Gurren Laganns," because it puts everything very nicely, an emphasis on Gurren Lagann itself, the symbol of hope, not as one thing, but as many. A direction for their energy and their hope, guidance, but to whichever one they choose as their future, to any star they want in the sky. And each one climbs higher towards those stars, no matter which one is picked. That kind of direction is exactly what a leader is supposed to instill in people. We have almost a microcosm of all of this in Yoko as well. In one dedicated episode, she conveniently embodies everything we just covered here with her students. When her new student Nakim needs to get back up, she doesn't offer a hand, but rather encouragement for him to do it himself.
You can get up by yourself, can't you?
She knows the mistakes they made in fighting for everyone else and the negative outcomes it would lead to. If things are dire enough that she needs to step in, she will, as she does later, But these small moments are where we can show people how to help themselves, not how to be helped. Similarly, when she does jump to Hakim's rescue when he genuinely needs help, she offers some words of inspiration saying,
I saw a view like this once before. I was with a boy who was a lot like you.
Like me?
we know this is the hero of the world, but he doesn't. And I like that. She's placing the importance of what Simon did not on him exactly, but rather on how he changed and what it meant. It keeps things away from the excessive personality focus that these cities shows and onto what matters, guiding this child to some better ideas. And here she really is like a leader, one who avoids more of Kamina and Simon's pitfalls. First of all, she adapted. It was obvious they were all misfits in government's roles and she wouldn't have been any better. So she left to adapt to the situation and continue to do something meaningful, not just a meek continuation of what she did before. And she removes herself from the grand stage that they fought on, fully aware that the leaders who work in everyday situations are just as important as those who lead the world. The latter is only possible because the former hold everything together at the base level, after all. And as a teacher, she's able to pass these lessons on to the next generation, helping to ensure that great leadership will continue on. Naturally, when the anti-spirals appear, it's a situation where a warrior is needed over a teacher, and this is something she was just as ready for. With a simple smack, she's back into form, ready to fight for the world once again. This is some supreme recognition that just as the world once changed to peace, it can change to anything at any time. The best thing she can do for her kids now isn't a lecture, but the safety of a swift victory. So she slips right back into it. Different times call for different leaders. Where everyone else learned a part of these lessons, one or two at a time, she figured them all out. They were all waiting for another war. She was adapting to try and prevent the next one. And I think Yoko is the most fitting note to end on, as a reminder that leadership isn't always something grand. It has the same goal, but it doesn't have to change the universe every time. Our world is just a collection of people all playing out their parts the same as everyone else. Team Gurren wasn't just Kamina, it wasn't just Simon, it wasn't just Yoko, it was everyone. Just because someone was at the helm doesn't make them any more important. They couldn't exist without everyone else who was following behind them. A leader only has power as long as they are followed. It was their decision to fight for the future they wanted, to put their faith in someone else who saw the same thing. It was just that the situation, one entirely unknown to them, led to so many pitfalls. They'd never needed this new world kind of leadership before, and the fact that they worked all of these lessons out in such a few tries is almost amazing, really. And hopefully I've been able to do some justice by those ideas that Gurren Lagann presented here, and help expand on all of your ideas of leadership as well, across these now 3 videos. I honestly forgot how amazing this series was and how it managed to accomplish both a very deep and meaningful message, which this is only one of a few in there, and also some of the most downright ridiculous and insane action of all time. But like leaders, that topic has a time and place that isn't right here and right now. So let me know if that more of a technical analysis of Gurren Lagann and trying to figure out why it is so good and so deep is something you'd like to see as well. And a good way to do that, which in full transparency also really helps with the algorithm, is to leave a like or a comment on this video. If I missed anything, if there's anything you want to add or another topic you'd like to see me cover, those are all good things for comments, which again, very good for the algorithm and everything, but I do appreciate them because they let me know what you thought of the video, if it was good or if it was bad, if I missed anything. And as well as being a motivation for me, it also adds a bit more perspective to get your ideas and see if I'm really making the things you want me to, and have the level of depth in my comment that you've come to appreciate from it. Anyway, I'm getting very long-winded at the end here, so I'll just leave you with a few links in the pinned comment. I'll have my Twitter where you can follow me and stay up to date and see random thoughts at like 1 in the morning. My Twitch, where we stream sometimes on Thursday nights and Saturday afternoons, depending on how busy I am. The Discord, where we hang out and have a few chats and some different things like that. And most importantly, my Patreon, where you can get your name at the end of videos like these lovely people above me right now. And if we can get just a few more people over there, we'll start doing some additional benefits as well. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you again soon.